this story out of Haaretz, the Israeli media. Israeli army uses Palestinian civilians to inspect potentially booby-trapped tunnels in Gaza. There's another way of saying that. The Israelis are using innocent Palestinians as human shields. And there's probably even another way of saying that, because when we hear that supposedly Hamas uses Palestinians as human shields, and therefore everything Israel does in killing Palestinian children, women, men, civilians, blowing up hospitals, blowing up schools, blowing up universities, blowing up 60, 70% of the housing in that country, blowing up water treatment facilities, stopping aid. All that is because Hamas's fault, because they're using Palestinian civilians as shields. In other words, don't shoot us because you'll shoot these innocent civilians. Well, in this case, that's not what's going on here. They are literally, the Israelis are literally using innocent Palestinians as basically cannon fodder. Our lives are more important than their lives. Gazans not suspected of terrorism are detained and sent. And first of all, do you know how completely innocent you need to be as a Palestinian to not be suspected of terrorism if you live in Gaza? Their rules of engagement are, if you're a male, you can get fired at, period.
Right.
This is from the Israeli press, Haaretz. Gazans not suspected of terrorism are detained and sent as human shields to search tunnels and houses before IDF soldiers enter, with the full knowledge of senior Israeli officers, several sources say. IDF claims this practice is forbidden. They claim this to maintain their self-described title of being the most moral army in the world.
They forbade the Hannibal Directive in the mid-aughts or 2010s, and apparently that was
and Israeli press has already reported that they in fact did engage the Hannibal Directive, which is to kill any Israelis, whether they are military or not, who look like they may be taken prisoner. At first, it's hard to recognize them, the piece writes. They're usually wearing Israeli uniforms. Many of them are in their 20s, and they're always with Israeli soldiers of various ranks. In other words, they dress them up as Israeli soldiers. But if you look more closely, you see most of them are wearing sneakers, not army boots. And their hands are cuffed behind their backs, and their faces are full of fear. The soldiers call each of them a sha'ish, an obscure Arabic word of Turkish origin meaning sergeant. Random Palestinians have been used by Israeli army units in the Gaza Strip for one purpose: to serve as human shields for soldiers during operations. We, I think, played a clip of some of this that may have come from Al Jazeera, if I remember correctly, months ago. And at that time, there seemed to be no one paying attention. Quote, our lives are more important than their lives, quote, soldiers were told. The thinking is it's better for the Israeli soldiers to remain alive and for the Sha'ashim to be the ones blown up by an explosive device. This description is one of many obtained by Haaretz, some from combat soldiers, other from commanders. The picture that emerges: in recent months, Israeli soldiers have used human shields in this way all over Gaza. Even the chief of staff's office knows it. Soldiers choose Gazans for the missions and bring them to the brigades and battalions operating in the Strip. There is pride in it, said a source who took part in some of the, quote, locating work. Quote, the senior ranks know about it, the source said. The army has played innocent despite footage shown on Al Jazeera about 2 months ago. Israeli soldiers can be seen dressing Palestinian detainees in uniforms and flak jackets, putting cameras on them and sending them into badly damaged houses and tunnel entrances with their hands bound by plastic ties. The Americans are furious, according to this. Through Vendon Patel, a State Department spokesperson, has said that the Israeli Defense Forces is investigating the incidents and that the evidence in the videos does not reflect the IDF values and violates rules and regulations. You know that thing that we keep hearing on the campaign thing? When they tell you who they are, believe them? Quote, when I saw the report from Al Jazeera, I said, yes, it's true. End quote, a combat soldier in conscript IDF brigade who took part in the use of Gazans as human shields told Haaretz. And then I saw the IDF's response, which totally doesn't reflect reality. It's done with the knowledge of the brigade commander at the least. I mean, this about 5 months ago, 2 Palestinians were brought to us. One was 20, the other was 16. We were told, use them. They're Gazans. Use them as human shields. The soldiers said that in the IDF, they know it's not a one-time incident of a young and stupid company commander who decides on his own to take somebody. So in other words, they know this is systemic. This is not a one-off. This in and of itself should be enough to invoke the Leahy rule. Law. There's just only so long that this can be denied. And, this isn't Haaretz. We should also be asking the question, why isn't it in the New York Times?
Yep.
Why isn't it in the Washington Post? Now, maybe it will be tomorrow, or maybe it'll just be mentioned offhandedly.
I can't wait for the first assessment of the American media in this time period because I remember thinking, we learned a lot of lessons from the run-up to the Iraq War. And no, it's the same, like malicious Borg.
I mean, this is, and it's, we're going to have to reckon with this. And I want Harris to win as much and more than probably a lot of people, frankly. But this stuff has to be addressed. And Harris campaign, I think ultimately, although it's unclear, it's really just going to be depending on how big of a story this becomes, is going to have to get a little closer to the line of where they perceive it's going to create some damage on their campaign or whatever reason. Now, I also think that it's quite possible there are dynamics that we just cannot see that may be inhibiting them. But I would keep your eye on the Twitter account of, what's his first name? Gordon? Is it Phil Gordon? Who is Harris's top national security advisor. He has a presidential title, but I think that is more often than not just simply a function of like sort of pro forma. This is a guy who was basically one of the biggest impetuses behind the Iranian nuclear deal. And just keep an eye on that Twitter. I can break down, and I think we've talked about the tweet that he put out there the other day. And we can put this up there. This is going to annoy people because it's a nuanced take. But I've seen others read this in the same way. And, we've talked about, I don't know, did we talk about this on air? About how cautious people like this are in the way that they use their language. And how specific, I wouldn't necessarily say legalistic, but very specific. And this was a week ago. Now, I don't know. We can argue as to like what the value of her coming out and saying, something at this juncture is. And you can argue that value both from an electoral standpoint, and you can argue that value from a actual impact on the ground standpoint. You can keep this up there because I want to read this. Phil Gordon wrote, the VP has been clear. She will always ensure Israel is able to defend itself against Iran and Iran-backed terrorist groups. Defend itself. She does not support an arms embargo on Israel. She will continue to work to protect civilians in Gaza and uphold international humanitarian law. Now, the policy options that range from doing nothing to an embargo on all arms, including defensive arms, to all arms, is rather large. You could send, Patriot missiles for Iron Dome or whatever it is, and then say, we're not going to send you any more planes. We're not going to send you any more tanks. We're not going to give you any more ammunition. We're not going to give you technology. We're not going to give you anything else. But that which is defensive specifically against Iran and Iran-backed terrorist groups. Defensive. I'm not saying that she has plans to do any of these things. All I'm just telling you is that this guy wrote this specifically. He could have written, she will always be, she does not support an arms embargo on Israel. He could have also written, she does not support conditioning military aid to Israel. But he didn't write that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways. You could have ended it after defend itself instead of against Iran and Iran-backed terrorist groups, although the Iran-backed makes me worry about Hezbollah.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah.
And then, she'll continue to work to protect civilians in Gaza and uphold international humanitarian law. He's saying international law. When you look at her comments, she says they have a responsibility, a moral responsibility. When you start to invoke law, that's when you see things starting to get serious. Not moral responsibility. Because then, who's the arbiter of moral and what does responsibility mean and all this. So I'm not suggesting that anything other than I think there is room to push Harris. I don't know how much of a material difference you're going to get in terms of what happens on the ground with the U.S. foreign policy, because I don't think she is in a position to shape that at this moment. She can't go in and say, I'm the vice president, Biden, do what I say. That's not happening. And again, we don't know what the dynamics are in terms of these relations, but if she wanted to be more full-throated against conditioning aid, she easily could have been, and this would have been the guy who was delivering that message. But it's good. I hope she continues to get pressure. I hope these stories get more traction in the media. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.